Good day, everybody. This is Yin Yang. No glasses on today. In California, with morsels of a thought number 1706 days in a row, I have come to you with morsels of a thought of knowledge. Hopefully, that people know what to do, which becomes wisdom. When they know the right thing to do, that becomes wisdom. And when they actually do the right thing, that becomes virtue. So we're bringing virtue into the world, a morsel of a thought at a time. Morsels of a Thought Wednesday is Words and Wisdom Wednesday. Today, I want to dive back in with one of the Stoics, Epictetus, in Rome. He was part of ancient Rome, and the Stoics were part of our philosophy. Alongside Christianity, coexisting and full of virtuous deeds and thinking. Okay? Epictetus on philosophical training. The entire translation is by Robin Waterfield. This is Epictetus's The Complete Works, Handbook, Discourses, and Fragments. And we're reading the introduction, the last part of it right now. We read about Epictetus's Stoicism last week. Now we're reading on Epictetus on philosophical training. For Epictetus, philosophy was not just the doctrine of doctrinal system. For Epictetus, philosophy was not just the construction of doctrinal systems, but a way to meet life's contingencies with equanimity and to make use of them for self improvement. Philosophy offers a glimpse of a better state, encouraging one to change, and then supplies the theoretical tools to understand what is involved in such work and the practical tools to progress toward that state. Philosophy is the way to gain expertise at the art of living. As with any art, it is not enough just to know the principles, one must also be able to put them into practice. As we saw earlier, Epictetus saw theory as a preliminary to practice and specifically to the practice of virtue. But virtue for a Stoic was knowledge. Epictetus is therefore saying that knowledge does not come from reading and understanding theory, but from putting that theory into practice. Only then will you transform information into knowledge and truly know what the books tell you. Morsels of a Thought goal in this show is to bring more wisdom and virtue to the world. Here we've got the perfect fit for it in the Stoics. Will, as we have seen, is the faculty that determines for each of us what we believe and so influences our activities. Will influences our activities. Assent, ASSENT, inclination or disinclination, and desire or aversion. These then are the three faculties that need to be trained until they are, quote, in accord with nature, end quote. At a number of points in the discourses, Epictetus outlines or refers to a training course designed for these three faculties. 1.4.11, there's a series of numbers and fragment 27. And then footnote 55. As several of these passages make clear, which is in the examples, if number 55, it is a progressive course. He consistently labels the three domains, as he calls them, first, second, and third, which is also called the last of the domains at 3.26.14. And he talks of moving on from one domain to the next, especially at 2.17.31 to 33. The first domain is that of desire, the second, that of inclinations, and the third, that of judgment or assent, ASSENT. Desire, inclination, and ascent, ASSENT, are the three areas of life where training is needed to make a person free and unconstrained by external hindrances. But the hindrances differ in each domain. The division of practical work into these three domains is original to Epictetus, his adaptation of Stoic material to practical training. Footnote 56. People who have trained their desires, that is, brought them under rational control, will never fail to get what they desire, 3.12.4, because they will have reduced their desires to reasonable levels and appropriate objects. They will have learned to properly apply their preconceptions about good and bad and understood that if they direct their desires toward things such as health, fame, wealth, and the avoidance of death, they are bound to be frustrated. Since frustrated desire is the source of all the passions, e.g., several passages, by eliminating desire for these things, people will gain control over their lives rather than be subject to their whims. 1.1.31. Completion of this phase of the training will rid a person of false conceptions of good and bad, so that one wants only what is morally good and wants to avoid all that is morally wrong. Epictetus calls this phase of the training the elimination of attachment to the external world, the most urgent, 3.2.3, and says that mastery of it would make one almost a complete philosopher, 3.14.10. Since inclination leads to action, training the second domain is supposed to supply us with the tools to act appropriately in all our various roles. Having learned during the first phase of training that virtue is the goal in all life's circumstances, this second stage applies that lesson in the domain of our roles, that is, in our everyday lives. It teaches students to recognize and fulfill their duties toward parents, gods, the community, and so on. So, completion of training in the first domain brings inner tranquility, the elimination of frustration, and completion in the second brings appropriate outward behavior. Together, they constitute the training of character, which is the field of ethics, as distinct from the third domain, which has to do with certainty of judgment. We are reading Epictetus, the introduction to Epictetus, and his complete works. It's Epictetus on philosophical training. We're in Morsels of Thought number 1706 for wisdom if we have it, and then virtue if we act on it. Okay. In terms of the Stoic theory of appropriation, in the first stage, we replace our instinctive desire for things such as health with the understanding that these things are indifferent compared with virtue. And in the second stage, we move from wanting to do good to ourselves to wanting to do good to others as well. We learn in the first phase to assess external things correctly, and that enables us to learn to act appropriately toward others in the second phase. At 2.14.8 to 9, Epictetus says that mastery of the first two domains makes one a true philosopher. The third phase, the training of assent or judgment, ASSENT, is designed to enable us to assent, ASSENT, only to true or beneficial impressions, to avoid being deceived, as Epictetus occasionally puts it, 1.4.11 and 3.2.7, even when, quote, asleep, drunk, and in a black mood, end quote, 2.17.33. See also 3.2.5. For this phase, rigorous training in logic is required, since logic in the capacious Stoic sense of the term, enables us to think clearly and transforms the true beliefs gained in the first two phases into secure knowledge. Now, as we have seen, logic, along with physics and ethics, formed part of the formal curriculum of Epictetus's school. But the point then was proficiency at argument 2.13.21, whereas the emphasis in this third phase of training is on observation of the way one's mind is working 3.2.5, so that one does not too readily give assent, ASSENT, to impressions. The outcome will be that all one's ethical views, value judgments, and so on are coherent and consistent. This result will enable one to be unassailable in the first two domains, 2.17.33. Thus, completion of training in the third domain consolidates the moral progress we have made by mastering the first two domains. Masters of all three domains makes people, quote, educated, end quote, in Epictetus's terms. They will always make correct use of their impressions, 3.21.23, note 57. It also fulfills the requirement constantly stressed in the discourses that ideally one should never be impeded or constrained. The first domain guarantees that one's desire will never be disappointed. The second makes one's inclinations unerring, 1.19.2. The third makes one incapable of being deceived or carried away by impressions. Possibly only a sage completes all three phases, 3.2.1, and it would not be surprising if Epictetus, along with all other Stoics, doubted whether a sage could exist. Mastery of the three domains would make one an expert in the art of living, and as any craftsman knows, improvement goes on for as long as one practices the craft. It is a lifelong, never-ending process. Epictetus nowhere tells us the particular exercises that constitute this three-phase training course, but quite a few exercises are mentioned in the discourses, and the translator, Robin Waterfield, I list some of them here, footnote 58. Most of them can readily be assigned to one or another of the three phases. Wow. The first domain is that of desire, the second of inclinations, and the third that of judgment or assent, ASSENT. Desire, inclinations, and judgment or assent. Desire, inclinations, or judgment or assent. Okay. Whew. General exercises. Okay, there are some exercises here. Yeah, I'm going to read the general exercises and not quote to you the other stuff. There are phases. Okay. So to have at hand, number one, to have at hand and to repeat to ourselves important theoretical principles and maxims until they have been absorbed. So he's got a list from 1.1.25 all the way to the handbook, all the way to the fragment 16, and we can put them into practice on all occasions. And he's got a list of occasions. Number two, to foresee possibilities, especially negative ones, either in general or at the start of the day, so as to be able to preempt disturbances. And there are examples including in the handbook. And at bedtime, to review with a critical eye, the events of the day. And he's got a list here. Number three, to assess one's progress, and he's got a list here. Number four, to act always with reservation so that one is never thwarted. And he's got handbook 2.24 and fragment 27 and footnote 59. Phase one exercises, that is, exercises that help us to see the indifference of everything except virtue and vice until we no longer desire anything else. Number one, to bring our bodily needs and desires under our control. There are up to Handbook 41. Number two, to practice responding correctly to things and, if necessary, to change habitual responses to the opposite responses. There's a list here. Number three, to undertake the gradual elimination of attachment to anything other than virtue. And he's got a list here, including handbook. Phase two exercises. I'm reading about exercises and Epictetus on philosophical training in the Stoics. The book is called Epictetus, The Complete Works, Handbook, Discourses, and Fragments. The translator is named Robin Waterfield, and we're reading his words now. I hope it's a man because I said his. Phase two exercises, that is, exercises designed to manage our inclinations so that we always act appropriately and ultimately virtuously. Number one, to look for the appropriate response in all situations. There's a list. Number two, to check our instinctive inclination to act in ways that are pleasant by imagining the pleasure we will get from refraining from such actions and the sense of regret we will experience if we do not refrain. And there's something in the handbook 34. Number three, to ask ourselves what a completely virtuous agent such as Socrates, Diogenes, or Heracles would do when faced with a situation like the one we are faced with. And he's got tons of examples, including Handbook 33.12. Phase three exercises, that is, exercises that train our faculty of judgment. Number one, to pause and catch the act of assent, A-S-S-E-N-T, before it happens so that we can check whether the impression is something to which we really want to assent. Number two, to assess before every decision what it demands of us and whether we can actually see it through, and stuff in the handbook and discourses. Number three, to relabel and reframe situations in more positive ways. And he's got all the way up to Handbook 11 and 43, such as seeing ourselves as parts of a whole. And there's a list here too. Epictetus's work is truly valuable in preserving for us these sketches of the kinds of exercises that supported Stoic theory. They are all supposed to be daily exercises. He's got a list. And Epictetus also frequently tells his students to remember or bear in mind their precepts, to pay attention, and to observe themselves. To follow Epictetus's training regime, students needed to develop constant self-awareness, monitoring their internal states all the time. 4.3.6, 4.9.16. These practical exercises were additional to studying the regular curriculum. Theory and practice went on in parallel. We can see why the work as a whole, not just studying the regular curriculum, but also attending the impromptu talks that made up discourses and practicing all the exercises, was considered arduous. And there's a whole list. Epictetus demanded a lot of his students, but there can be little doubt that if they put in the work, they would get the results he promised. Freedom from all the emotional and other drawbacks of attachment to external things, a well functioning and unstoppable will, and the ability to act appropriately and do good to others. Now, for the last 5 minutes, I'm going to talk about how this attaches to us. There are notes in here, 59 footnotes, and then there's the handbook, which we start with, and I can read you the first paragraph. Handbook 1.1.1. Some things are up to us, and some are not. This is Epictetus's words now. Up to us are judgment, inclination, desire, aversion. In short, whatever is our own doing, and he explains aversion later. Not up to us are our bodies, possessions, reputations, public offices, in short, whatever isn't our own doing. Number two, moreover, the things that are up to us are naturally free, unimpeded, and unobstructed, while the things that aren't up to us are weak, enslaved, subject to impediment, and not ours. Impedimenta was luggage. If you can't believe it, that's what impediment meant in Latin. Luggage. So remember this. If you regard things that are naturally enslaved as free, if you regard things that are not yours as yours, you'll be obstructed, dejected, and troubled, and you'll blame both gods and men. But if you regard as yours only what is yours, and not as yours only what is not yours, which is the way things are in reality, no one will ever constrain you. No one will impede you. You'll blame no one. You'll reproach no one. You'll never act reluctantly. No one will harm you, and you'll have no enemies because you'll never suffer harm. Virtue keeps us out of trouble, generally speaking. And sometimes when there is trouble, some things are up to us and some are not. When things are not up to us and we have a lot of trouble, things happen for a reason. That's what the Stoics imagine. Educate themselves to believe. And what we're doing here is adding virtue into our lives with morsels of a thought of words and wisdom for Wednesday. Today, Robin Waterfield has brought to us Epictetus in an entire book. And this is his complete works, the discourses, the fragments, and the handbook. And we're going to read through this slowly over time. We've read a little bit before. I'm marking some pages that we've read, and we've read in the discourses a little bit, and we have read notes, and we have read fragments. Not everything, but we will eventually get through this book. There are days when I will talk about other things on Wednesdays, but other times I will go through the Stoics on Wednesdays as well. You can find Stoicism online a lot nowadays because it's just popular. But what I like about it is that it emphasizes virtue, recognition of virtue versus vice. There's a big difference between virtue versus vice. It actually names the thing that is not virtuous. When we know the right things to do, we have wisdom. When we do them and commit the action, we then are committing acts of virtue. We need to act in ways that are good to us, good to ourselves, good to others, and good to mankind in general. The thing that we want is inner peace. We want outer peace and we want inner peace. Outer peace is a lot easier to handle sometimes than inner peace because inner peace, you can't see it. And sometimes you've got to look inside yourself, and that's really hard for some people right away. But over time, little by little, stay with yourself for 1 second or two and then go on your day. But every day, bring yourself to yourself on the ground level and see if you can't be with yourself for a second or two and more time until you bring it to close to half an hour. Okay? I'll talk to you again later. Okay, old Kinderhook. Bye bye.